Fat girl's stepfather threw her out in blizzard. Mountain man found her and said, "You're never going back." The blizzard howled like a wild beast outside the Ashford house, rattling shutters and burying the town of Frostbridge in drifts of white. Inside, the fire in the stove had nearly died, leaving the kitchen in shadows. Winifred Winnie Ashford, 21 years old, sat hunched on a stool, clutching her shawl around her soft frame, praying the storm would pass quickly. But it was not the storm she feared. The door burst open, and Silas Grimm staggered in, reeking of whiskey and failure. He had lost badly at the poker tables again. His face, red with drink and rage, twisted into something monstrous the moment he saw her. "You useless sow!" he snarled, his voice thick with venom. "All you do is eat, take up space, and remind me I'm cursed. No man wants you. Your mother left me nothing but debt and a fat burden." Winnie's cheeks burned. She wanted to protest, to remind him that it was her late mother's store he had squandered, her hard work that kept the shelves stocked. But shame strangled her words. She had heard it too often, that she was unlovable, unwanted. Silas grabbed her by the arm, yanking her up from the stool. "Out into the snow with you. If you freeze, so be it. Better the storm have you than me." Before she could beg, the door was thrown wide, and the freezing wind swallowed her whole. Dressed only in a thin nightdress, her shoes worn through at the soles, she stumbled into the white void. Behind her, the door slammed, the bolt slid home. The snow bit her skin like knives. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She walked blindly, each step heavier than the last, until her knees buckled. She fell into the drift, the world spinning, and then, just before darkness claimed her, she saw a shadow moving through the storm, broad-shouldered, tall, steady as the pines. A man's voice, low and fierce, cut through the blizzard. "You're not dying out here, not while I breathe." When Winnie woke, she thought she had died and gone to some strange heaven. The air smelled of pine smoke, of stew simmering slow. The crackle of a fire filled her ears. She lay beneath thick wool blankets, warmer than she had been in years, and the ceiling above her was not the sagging plaster of Frostbridge, but sturdy beams of hand-hewn timber. Her first instinct was panic. She bolted upright, breath shallow, and realized she wore a clean linen shift, not her nightdress. Her cheeks flamed with shame. Someone must have changed her. The door creaked, and he entered. Matthias Ironwood. He filled the doorway like a mountain itself, shoulders broad, hair dark and tangled from the storm, a beard covering the lower half of his rugged face. His eyes, brown and steady, studied her, not with hunger or mockery, but with a calm weight that unsettled her more than cruelty would have. "You're awake," he said simply. His voice was low, gravelly, but steady. "You'll be weak for a while. Drink this." He offered a mug of broth, steam curling into the air. Winnie took it with trembling hands, avoiding his gaze. You saved me?" Matt nodded once. "Found you half dead in the snow. Another hour, and you'd have been gone." "I'm sorry," she whispered, lowering her eyes. "I didn't mean to trouble you. I'll leave as soon as I can walk." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, then anger, not at her, but at what she believed. "You were thrown out like trash. That's no fault of yours, and you won't be going back there." Winnie flinched. The memory of Silas's drunken roar echoed in her skull. "He's my stepfather, my guardian." Matt's jaw hardened. "A guardian protects. He abandoned you to die. You're not going back." She swallowed hard. shame and gratitude battling inside her. No one had ever spoken of her worth before, not her mother, too tired and ill to shield her, not the townsfolk, who whispered that Winnie was too plain, too fat, too strange to marry. Certainly not Silas, who used her as a scapegoat for every loss at the tables. But Matthias Ironwood was no townsman. He was the recluse whispered about at Frostbridge's saloon, the ex-soldier who had lost his wife and son in a fire, who had built himself a cabin high on White Peak and lived like a ghost. Men said he was half wild. Women called him dangerous. Looking at him now, Winnie did not see danger. She saw grief carved deep into his features, a man carrying his own exile. The days passed slowly. She was too weak to stand at first, so he brought her food, hearty stews, bread baked on a stone hearth, venison roasted until it fell apart. Each time she tried to take less, embarrassed by her appetite, but he frowned. You need strength. Eat. You're not a burden. At night, she lay in the small room he had given her, listening to the wind batter the cabin walls, and thought of his words. Not a burden. No one had ever said that to her, and each morning she watched him silently as he split wood, fed the chickens, or mended gear. He worked with quiet efficiency, as though speaking cost him more than swinging an axe. Yet whenever he looked her way, there was a steadiness in his eyes that made her chest ache. He was not her captor, not her judge. He was simply the man who had found her in the storm and decided she was worth saving. The storm raged for days. Snow piled higher against the cabin walls, cutting them off from the outside world. For Winnie, it felt as though she had stepped into another existence, one far removed from Frostbridge's sneers and Silas Grimm's cruelty. Here there was only the mountain, the fire, and Matthias Ironwood. At first, she was frightened of him. He moved with a quiet intensity, his silence stretching longer than any conversation she had ever known. He spoke only when necessary. Eat this, rest, keep your leg wrapped, yet his actions spoke louder than words. He always left the warmest quilt for her. He placed her chair nearest the hearth. He carved a crutch from pine wood so she could hobble without pain. When the storm finally eased, Matt declared it was time for her to see the mountain not from the window, but with her own eyes. "If you're to heal," he said, "you need more than food. You need the air, the work. Out there." Bundled in a coat he had stitched for her, Winnie stepped into the white world. The snow dazzled her eyes, the air bit her lungs, and yet she felt alive in a way she hadn't in years. Matt led her along a narrow path he had shoveled, guiding her with a steady hand. They stopped at the chicken coop half buried in drifts, and he showed her how to check for eggs. Later, at the woodpile, he demonstrated how to swing the axe. "I can't," Winnie murmured, gripping the handle awkwardly. "I'll look foolish." "You'll look strong," Matt replied. His voice carried no mockery, only fact. "Try." She raised the axe, missed, then tried again. When at last the log split cleanly, Matt's lips curved into the faintest smile. "See? Strong." That night, Winnie lay awake, replaying that single word. Strong. No one had ever called her that. Days melted into weeks. Matt taught her to identify herbs beneath the snow, to snare rabbits, to mend torn mittens with twine. She, in turn, cooked meals that warmed them both, humming softly as she stirred the pot. He began listening at the doorframe, pretending not to notice her songs, but his eyes softened whenever her voice filled the cabin. One evening, as they ate by lamplight, Winnie apologized again for her presence. I've taken up too much of your food, your fire, your time. I shouldn't still be here." Matt set down his spoon. "You think you're a burden because men like Grim told you so. But you're not. You've kept this place alive these past weeks. Your hands, your cooking, even your songs. Don't mistake yourself for less than what you are." Her throat tightened, and she looked away quickly, lest he see the tears. As winter waned, the journey into trust deepened. They walked further into the forest, hauling logs together. They laughed, awkward, hesitant but real, when she slipped in the snow and he caught her before she fell. At night, by the fire, they spoke in longer threads. His years in the army, her dreams of teaching children to read, the loneliness that had shadowed them both. Once she whispered, "Why did you save me?" His gaze held hers steadily. "Because I couldn't do anything else. No man with a soul leaves another to die in the snow. And because when I saw you, I saw someone who deserved to live, to be more than what the world called you." Her heart beat wildly. She wanted to believe him, wanted to step into the warmth of those words. But doubt still lingered, whispering that she was too plain, too heavy, too unworthy of such steadfast kindness. Still, as they trudged back through the snow that evening, his steady hand at her elbow, Winnie realized she no longer feared the silence between them. She welcomed it, for in the silence she felt seen. By March, the mountain no longer howled with winter's fury. The drifts softened, and thin streams of meltwater ran down the slopes. Yet inside Matt's cabin, warmth was constant. The hearth burned nearly every hour, its glow casting golden light over the rough-hewn beams, the shelves of worn books, and the sturdy table scarred by years of use. To Winnie, it felt like stepping each day into a world apart, a place untouched by the cruelty of Frostbridge. Matt gave her the small bedroom off the main room. Its bed was piled with quilts, its window facing the pines. "It's yours," he told her simply. No man had ever given her a space of her own before. Life settled into a rhythm. Each morning, Matt chopped wood while Winnie prepared porridge or biscuits. At first, she worried over the portion sizes, taking little for herself, but Matt always insisted she eat first. "You'll do no good to anyone starving yourself," he'd say, nudging a plate toward her. By mid-morning, they tended to chores together. Matt showed her how to mend the roof shingles, how to patch holes in the chicken coop, how to check the trap set further in the forest. At first, Winnie felt clumsy beside him, convinced her weight and inexperience made her a hindrance. But Matt never once criticized. Instead, he taught with patience, and when she succeeded, his approval came quietly but powerfully. A nod, a faint smile. Sometimes the murmur of, "Good work, Winnie," and she bloomed beneath it. The evenings were her favorite. After supper, Matt would whittle by the fire, shaping handles, carving figures, while Winnie sewed new curtains for the windows or read aloud from one of his old books. Her voice trembled at first, self-conscious, but one night Matt interrupted softly. "Don't stop. You've got a voice that belongs in this cabin." She read on, cheeks warm, and noticed how his eyes softened whenever her voice filled the room. There were small kindnesses that made her heart ache in ways she had never known. He strung a line of lanterns outside so she wouldn't fear the dark when stepping out at night. He built her a stool so she could reach the high shelves without strain. Once, when she burned her hand cooking, he dropped his tools instantly, took her hand, and pressed a poultice gently against the blister. His touch was firm, but never unkind. Winnie found herself smiling more often, even laughing. The sound startled her at first, unused as she was to joy. But Matt never looked away when she laughed. He listened as though it mattered. As spring pressed closer, they ventured further from the cabin. He took her fishing by the stream, guiding her hands on the line until she caught her first trout. Her squeal of delight echoed through the valley, and Matt's rare smile broke into a laugh of his own. That night they feasted on the trout, and Winnie confessed, "I never thought I'd be able to do something like that." "You can do anything," he answered simply. "You just needed someone to remind you." And slowly, the shame that had clung to her since childhood began to loosen its grip. She caught herself humming while sweeping the floor or pausing in the doorway just to breathe in the mountain air. She even dared to look in the small cabin mirror longer, noticing her rosy cheeks, the light in her eyes. One evening, as snowflakes returned briefly, drifting like feathers outside, Winnie grew quiet. "Matt, why are you so kind to me?" she asked. He set down the knife he'd been whittling with. His eyes met hers steadily. "Because I see you, not the lies Grim spat at you, not the names the town used, just you, and you're worth every kindness." Her throat tightened. She whispered, "No one has ever said that to me?" He leaned back in his chair, his voice low but certain. Then they were blind. The fire cracked, filling the silence. Winnie turned away quickly, blinking back tears. But in her chest, something warm and fragile stirred, a hope she had long thought dead. Each day that followed carried new small moments. Matt teaching her to split logs, steadying her grip until she found the rhythm. Winnie surprising him with a pie baked from wild berries she had foraged, his gratitude almost boyish. The two of them sitting on the porch at dusk, watching the horizon blush pink and gold. It was not grand declarations that bound them, but the quiet certainty of shared life. And though Winnie still struggled with doubt, she began to believe that perhaps this mountain cabin could truly be her home, and Matt her companion through every season. The thaw of spring brought more than budding pines and rushing streams. It also carried whispers up the mountain, carried by traders who stopped at Frost Bridge, then spread rumors of Matthias Ironwood and the woman who now lived with him. At first, Winnie paid no mind. She had grown used to whispers, the way townsfolk muttered "fat girl" behind her back. But one afternoon, when Matt returned from bartering in town with flour and lamp oil, his jaw was tight. "They're talking," he muttered, setting the sack down hard. Winnie looked up from kneading dough. "About what?" "About us. That I dragged you up here. That you're my property." His voice was low, strained with disgust. Her stomach clenched. Of course, even here, beyond the reach of Frost Bridge's streets, judgment had found her. "It doesn't matter," she whispered. But the lie burned her tongue. It did matter. She had spent her whole life being called unwanted, unworthy. Now they would twist even her salvation into shame. That night she lay awake, listening to Matt's steady movements as he added wood to the fire. She wanted to ask him if he regretted saving her, but she feared the answer. A week later, the past arrived in flesh and blood. Silas Grimm rode up the mountain with 2 men at his back. Winnie saw them first through the window and froze, the rolling bile of dread flooding her throat. Matt stepped outside before she could stop him. "You've got no business here, Grim." Silas dismounted, his smile oily, his breath reeking even from yards away. "No business? I've come for what's mine. The girl. She's my stepdaughter, my ward. Law says she belongs under my roof." "She's no one's property," Matt snapped. Silas's eyes narrowed. "You're a fool, Ironwood. Word is you've struck copper on this mountain. You think I don't know? The claim papers, the maps. Winnie has them, doesn't she? Her mother left more than a shop when she died." Winnie gasped. She remembered now the leather pouch her mother had hidden away, papers Silas had torn the house apart searching for. She had tucked it into her dress the night he threw her out, forgotten in the chaos. The pouch still lay in her trunk, beneath her few folded clothes. Matt glanced at her through the doorway. He read the truth in her eyes. "Even if she did," Matt growled, "you'll never lay a hand on her again." Silas laughed harshly. "You think the town will side with you, a recluse living with a fat little harlot? No, Ironwood, they'll believe me. They'll say you kept her prisoner, and when they come, they'll drag her down screaming." The words struck deep. Winnie trembled, shame flooding her veins. Was that how people saw her? How they would always see her? But then Matt stepped closer to Silas, his frame towering, his voice like iron. "If they come, I'll stand in front of her, and if you take one more step toward this cabin grim, you'll regret it." Silas spat on the ground, mounted his horse, and snarled, "This isn't over." His men followed, their laughter carrying down the trail like wolves. When they were gone, Winnie collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands. "He's right," she whispered. "They'll say you forced me here, that I'm not worth your fight." Matt knelt before her, tilting her chin until her tear-filled eyes met his steady gaze. "Let them talk. I know the truth, and so do you." "But the papers, then we'll face it together," he said firmly. "Your mother's claim is yours, Winnie, not his. And you are not a burden I carry. You are the reason I carry on." His words lodged deep in her chest. For the first time, she realized this was not only about survival, it was about belonging, about fighting for the right to exist, to be loved, to claim her place in a world that had tried to erase her. But Silas Grimm was not finished, and neither, it seemed, was the past. The night they came, the mountains lay hushed under a silver moon. Winnie woke to the low growl of the dogs outside, followed by the crunch of boots in snow. Her heart thudded against her ribs. Matt was already on his feet, rifle in hand. "Stay behind me," he murmured, but Winnie shook her head. Weeks of tending the land, of splitting logs and holding her ground against the whispers, had hardened something inside her. "Not this time. I won't hide." A heavy knock thundered at the cabin door, then Silas's voice, thick with liquor and venom. "Open up, Ironwood. Time to hand her over before things get ugly." Matt's voice rang calm but deadly. "She's not leaving this cabin, ever." Laughter echoed from outside. 3, maybe 4 men. Then the crash of a boot against wood. The door shuddered, the iron latch straining. Matt raised his rifle, but before he could fire, Winnie stepped forward, her own hands gripping the revolver he'd taught her to use. Her knees trembled, but her aim was steady. The door burst open. Silas lunged inside with 2 hired thugs. For a heartbeat, the world was chaos. Shouts, splintered wood, the reek of sweat and whiskey. Matt fired first, a warning shot that splintered the frame. One man fled instantly, cursing into the night. The other swung a knife, only to be slammed back by Matt's sheer strength. And then Silas came for her. His eyes gleamed with cruelty. You think you're better than me now, you useless sow? He hissed, grabbing for her arm. But Winnie did not cower. She raised the revolver, barrel inches from his chest. I am not yours, she said, her voice shaking but fierce. Not your burden, not your property, not ever again. Silas froze, stunned by the fire in her eyes. For the first time, she saw fear flicker across his face. Matt seized the moment, wrenching Silas back and pinning him against the wall. Hear her, Matt growled. She belongs to no one but herself. Outside, hoofbeats pounded, the sheriff and deputies, summoned by the fleeing man. Within minutes, Silas was dragged out in irons, spitting curses that no longer held power. His reign of terror was over. When the cabin door closed again, silence returned. Winnie's revolver slipped from her grasp, clattering to the floor. Matt caught her as her knees gave way. You were brave, he whispered, pulling her against his chest. Tears streamed down her face, but she smiled through them. I was strong, like you said. He kissed her forehead, his voice breaking. Stronger than you know. The storm had passed, both outside and within. Snow lay thick across the clearing, glittering in the pale dawn. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned, its light dancing across the timber walls. Winnie sat near the hearth, wrapped in a quilt Matt had laid across her shoulders. Her hands still trembled, but not from fear, rather from the enormity of what had happened. She had faced Silas, faced the man who had tormented her, and for the first time she had not backed down. Matt placed a steaming mug of coffee in her hands. He lowered himself beside her, his broad frame weary but steady. For a long moment, neither spoke. The quiet between them was its own kind of sanctuary. Finally, Winnie whispered, What happens now? Matt's gaze softened. He reached for her hand, calloused fingers folding over hers. Now, you're safe. This place is your home, if you'll have it. Her throat tightened, tears welling again. Not the bitter tears of shame or fear, but the kind that came when a soul finally found refuge. She nodded, unable to speak, and leaned into him. The fire popped, sending sparks upward like tiny stars. Beyond the window, the mountains rose silent and eternal, as if keeping their secrets. Winnie rested her head against Matt's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. For the first time in her life, she felt chosen, not as a burden, not as a trade, but as someone worthy of being loved. Yet, somewhere beyond those peaks, the world still turned with its cruelties and whispers. The question lingered, unspoken but heavy. Was their love strong enough to withstand whatever storms might come next? Stories like Winnie and Matt's remind us that even in the darkest storms, there can be light waiting on the other side. Love is not about perfection or appearances. It is about safety, respect, and the courage to choose one another when the world tries to tear you apart. Every time I see your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us across distances, across hearts. Where are you listening from tonight? Do you believe love like this still exists? Share your thoughts below, and if you do, don't go anywhere. The next story is waiting just for you.